Okay, so most of my career in the web over the last 20, 25 years has been a kind of trying to design at a broader level, certainly than the designer. You know, one of the rules of usability or user experience is that you are not the user. But then the bigger challenge I felt was, you know, the organization and the views and the needs of the organization often constrain the design approach in a quite negative way. And I really felt that I had struck gold when I had discovered that you should design for the user, the customer, and that the orientation of design and thinking should be focused on making it simple and easier to get people to do things. But as global warming has gathered pace, and I began to realize that maybe the people have a part to play in this global warming in how we consume and what we're actually doing on this planet, and that us as designers making it easier for people to consume is not always a good or a positive thing, and that we should think in another perspective. We have to take all of these into account in any sort of design. It's not that we ignore the designer themselves or the organization or the user, but we need to also think about the society that people live within, and then the broader earth on which we all live, and that a concept of that we also need to have an earth experience. You know, what is the experience of all life on this earth for the decisions that we're actually making? So in the older model that you would have driven a lot of, or me or the personal would have driven, and the organization and the ultimate, we would move to the top in this hierarchy, this type of Maslow's hierarchy, and the user would be the ultimate top. That maybe we need to look at it slightly differently, and that again, us are at the bottom, then the organization, and then there's the user. And taking up most of the thinking is the earth, because that's where we exist, and that's what right now we are destroying through overproduction and over consumption. So what would earth experience be? What would be the components of it? How would we think about design from an experience of the earth's point of view? Well, I felt one of the things that we don't calculate in modern economies nearly as much is cost. So many, particularly of the digital economies, are free-based, or at least they seem like they're free-based. But of course, the free-based economies are driven by advertising, and advertising is probably the single most destructive industry of Earth's resources. And we could speak for years about why that is, but you know, I've explained that to a degree in a chapter in the book Worldwide Waste, that when something is free, it tends to use a tremendous amount of hidden resources. So we really need to think about the cost of things and paying for things that we value and understanding value. Also, and I believe totally in growth most of my life, most of my career, that we must grow, that economies must grow, etc. But if we focus on different models, that we don't necessarily have to keep growing and using resources, and that we can create a lot of positivity and really good experiences and good living conditions within limited constraints. And how do we achieve degrowth? Well, I think we achieve degrowth by a focus on the waste that we are creating, because in the vast majority of situations, we are creating, for every 1 unit of value that we create, we are creating 9 units of waste. And if we only could address the waste problem, which is, 40, 50 million tons of e-waste every year. 40 million tons is the equivalent of all the aircraft ever built. There's a massive waste problem that digital is driving and accelerating. I thought of the concepts of thinking about the planet and the number of trees on the planet, and there used to be about 4.5 trillion. Now there's estimated there's about 3 trillion trees. We cut down about 15 billion a year. We plant about 10. So we're losing 5 billion trees every year, 200 million of which are used in the US just for e-commerce returns. So e-commerce returns in digital 3 to 4 times higher than in physical, because digital and accelerant and all these negatives. And in the data environment, the global economy is estimated to be about $80 trillion. By 2035, it's estimated we will have created about 2,000 zettabytes of data. Now, to store 2,000 zettabytes of data would cost, based on current day monetary of hard disks, would cost about $58 trillion. So assuming we grow at 3% a year, the global economy, by 2035, that global economy would be worth about $130 trillion. And we'd be spending $58 trillion just on storing data. That's not sustainable. The growth in data is at an extraordinary pace. And 90% of it we don't use. Tech target, 90% of data never accessed 3 months after it's stored. 80% of digital data never accessed. 90% of data not analyzed. 90% of data never analyzed according to the IDC. 90% of Internet of Things data never used. If we could only manage our waste in data and our waste in e-waste, hold on to our phones significantly longer, loads of positive things we can actually do. If we focus on the waste in digital, we can contribute significantly to helping in global warming. But so many of the new technologies, artificial intelligence, incredibly hungry for energy and data. Blockchain is a total disaster from an environmental point of view. A Visa transaction about 0.002 kilowatt. The same transaction in Bitcoin, 906 kilowatts. Bitcoin is 500,000 times more inefficient than Visa is at actually transacting. That model doesn't work. We have very negative models of energy in digital, and we really need to change those, because otherwise digital becomes a key accelerant of global warming and the extinction of all life on this planet.
Yeah, and if you know me a bit, my question is always, what can we do about? I mean, complaining about this situation, it's not enough. And what can we do as the intersection group? And Gerry is also a member of this group. So we will also have a work stream where we can discuss what can we do in the intersection toolkit. And the good thing is we have a few tools already in there, and I will talk in the next 10 minutes or so about them a bit. So if you go to the next slide, please. We all know these 3 facets, and we are sure that there's a green component in all of them. I mean, you can have a green brand and you can have green products and so on. And that's certainly true. But this talk, it's about digital architecture. So it's about structure. And I'm with Chris Potts, who says that's value in structure. So with this talk, we focus on architecture. And architecture means that we think the companies must put as much focus on themselves, on their structures, to keep them reusable, to keep them adaptive, to keep them as waste-free as possible, as they put on the customer. So quite often I say we are too customer obsessed. Maybe that's not popular talking in a designer conference, but if I understood Bruce Mao yesterday in this awesome talk, the vision is it's not only about the customer, and Gerry, you also had it in your talk. So we must balance better between what we need immediately to come up with customer value now, time to market goals, with sustainability. And sustainability has a lot to do with architecture and well-designed architectures. So the next, please. And now let's zoom into this blue bubble. Yeah, so the architecture component where I'm coming from, and this is the meta model. And in this meta model, we have a very important concepts. We call this capabilities. And today we are talking only about a part of this meta model, about capabilities and how they are related to applications, so IT applications. That's the connection we have with the intersection toolkit with the IT world. And so when you think of a capability, you just think of a piece, a building block, a reusable building block of a company. What are we capable of achieving right now? Or maybe what should we be capable of achieving tomorrow? So it's focusing on the strengths. So capabilities, in one sentence, are the basic building blocks. And if you model them well, they are the optimal reusable building blocks, according to Jeannie Ross' awesome book, Designed for Digital. She talks about the business components, and we believe that's important to modularize the business and bring together what belongs together to and then assign applications to it. So the next one, please. So yeah, the elephant again. So I can't have a talk without an elephant. Those who know me know that. They are the modular business components. And if you model them correctly, and the way we do it in the intersection toolkit is a bit differently from other bodies of knowledge. We had some arguments with other authorities and other communities. For us, we model them in a way that they have the highest cohesion possible. So cohesion means together what belongs together. Tasks that belong together, tasks that need similar skills should be coupled in a capability. And one of the goals is to foster reuse, and one is to be a blueprint also for the organization. So I think the ideal organization should be built around these modules and around those components. I also discussed with Naomi 2 weeks ago what was an interesting discussion. Okay, the next one, please. Yeah, and how does this look like? If you look that's a really simple one from a bank, and what you see there is that on the top layer, it's a decomposition. Yeah, you decompose the business in blocks of blocks. Yeah, and if you say, okay, that's the company, that's the bank, and then you must make a decision. How do I decompose on the first level? So, and this bank makes the decisions. Okay, we make a decomposition by sales, so that's the first capability, and then we have back office operations. So these are two parts of a process. They are, yeah. And within operation execution, they decided to go with the product groups. So it's a design decision that you decompose capabilities by product groups. You do that quite often because the tasks there are similar in a product line, in a car, and so on. So, and then what you can see, the bank made two decisions. One decision, sales and service is similar. It's independent of the product. If we sell a Giro or a loan product, it's similar. But if we go to the back office, it's so different to process a loan and to process a Giro that they are different building blocks. So when you model capabilities, and if you're interested, I run webinars on Wednesdays usually on this topic, you always need to make this decision intentionally. Shall I decompose by a task, a group of tasks that is reusable to foster reuse? Or is the higher cohesion driven by the process? I'm not happy with the addiction to value streams, for example. It's not always about following the value. Sometimes you must follow and foster and reuse. Okay, so the next one, please. Yeah, and once you have this, and I'll make this short, it's a perfect way to connect IT applications to it, to find redundancies. And that's what we have in this toolkit. So once you have this elephant model, these capabilities, and then you have the optimal building blocks that are as redundancy free as possible. And then you can reuse and adapt them. And when you do this simple overlay with IT application, it's quite easy to find those redundancies. And to find those redundancies is one of a major step to reduce complexities. In my experience, I'm with Gerry, I've seen so many companies and they have maybe 90% of waste. If I could have the chance to reduce complexity, reduce the application landscape to a redundancy-free one, I think I would have ended up to 10 or 15% of the IT landscape. So we must know that this is really a disaster. Okay, the next one. So what we need, and that's also part of intersection toolkit, we must have a managed evolution of complexity. Currently, the key performance indicator is not present in the boardroom. So when managers make decisions, it's about money and it's about new products, customer value. That's true. So you go there and you say, I want to make this project, and then you must have a business case, and usually it's around customer value. But there's value in the structure. And if you don't invest as much as you invest in customer value, what happens is architecture decay. So if you don't take care of your key performance indicator, if you don't measure complexity, if you don't measure number of applications, for example, if you're just driven by time to market on short term, the consequence is what we see in companies, and almost, I think 98% of companies I've seen have a disastrous IT situation and redundancies 9 times, and they waste 90% of energy. And there are some ways, if we make enterprise design in combination with enterprise architecture, a management instrument, and bring it to the boardrooms. So the next, please. So we must be aware that enterprise design should be a management discipline. It must be a natural part, and the idea we have for next year, we want to come up with an article in Harvard Business Review, because enterprise design is much too important to keep it in a tiny community of motivated designers. We must open it, and we must bring it to the boardroom, and the people that make the big decision and have the story. It's not only about customer value now, it's also about a constant investment in your structures, a constant investment in the reduction of complexity. So I think we can only be successful with intersection and intersection group if we make it to the boardroom. And if we say, okay, it's not enough to discuss between user experience, architecture, and so on, we must bring it to there and have a strong KPI that measures the quality of the architecture. So how good is it? Architecture is such a complex and abstract thing. I don't think that managers grasp it. Okay. So Gerry, some words about this one?
Yeah, and I think it's summation. Wolfgang has talked a lot about architecture and reuse, and I think that's absolutely critical to a sustainable organization. So summarization of the Earth experience principles about true value and true cost, really understanding that nothing is free and paying for stuff that has value. Looking at the situation rather than what can we create, collect, or buy, saying what can we not do. Looking at strategies of degrowth rather than constantly building, launching apps, etc., as if it's always the answer to everything. Deleting 90%, a constant review and archiving and deletion, getting that waste out of the system, because the quicker we get the waste out of the system, the more energy that's saved. Obviously, the less waste we create in the first place, the more energy that's saved. Reuse and sharing, we cannot achieve reuse and sharing without good architecture, without good metadata, without good classification designs. You can't find what you need to reuse, and if you don't have put good structure on your code, it won't be shareable. So reuse and sharing is absolutely critical, connected with good architectural design. So looking at minimize creation waste. When we're creating content or code, looking at how can we choose the least intensive communication device. Is it SMS, or is it email, or is it video? What's the least intensive? The use waste is when the person is using the website, is the weight of the page at the lightest possible that it can be, so that in the use of the thing, there is the least energy. So in the creation of the thing and in the use of the thing, that we are looking at reducing waste. And visualize, I think Wolfgang has touched on this as well, that we need to come up with models that show the complexity and show the waste and whether it's growing or being reduced within the environment. And I think that's a big challenge for designers to say, how do we visualize this problem? Because without the building of visualizations and empathy for the problem, then management won't be aware of it, or employees won't be aware of it, and the desire to change will not be as great. So these are the principles of Earth experience design that we've been developing.
And the good thing and the good story is that the tools are there. That's not a problem. It's more about making management and companies aware. My experience is they just don't know. They don't understand. They think it's an IT problem and the IT department will solve it. It's their problem. That's what I always say. Architecture should be on the agenda of the CEO, and it's their problem. It's their architecture. So if it's in this disastrous situation we have today, we have bad business decisions. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic, Wolfgang and Gerry. Thank you so much. I assumed from that pause that we were approaching some kind of conclusion. Is that correctly assumed?
I think so.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect conclusion. I mean, nothing more to say.
Well, I mean, I think it's powerful to kind of land on the fact that, you know, an architecture problem is always the CEO's problem, right? And then you can start thinking about, why does everybody want to be CEOs? But that's for a different day. There's tons of questions in the chat. I'm just going to dive right in. Joanne has a question for Gerry. Have you examined why or how the waste were created in the first place? Instead of finding ways to reuse the water, which is a reactive response, can we eliminate the waste to begin with? A more proactive response.
Yeah, and I think we have to get to that space. And I think the reason we didn't focus on waste is we have had a culture of cheap raw materials, whether cheap oil or cheap, things seem very cheap. And then we come in to a digital environment where things are very throwawayable. And actually we've built economies of waste. Somebody in the 50s in the plastic industry said, our objective, the future of plastics is in the trash bin. You know, so when we're getting people to throw plastics away, then we're going to have maximum growth within the plastic industry. So there's so many industries that we have today that are actually designed to create waste. So whether it's planned obsolescence, waste actually creates a lot of short-term profit. So if you rip through resources and water and etc., it's actually, in a short-term economic view, you can make more profit quickly by destroying the environment than by nurturing the environment.
And here you're very close to also beginning an answer for Bulent, who's curious about kind of if we should repeat now the current paradigm out of which all this waste is generated. You were beginning basically a response.
Yeah, I think we have to change. Like, I mean, I've been reading about degrowth and the concepts around, and I thought, oh, that's crazy. You know, I couldn't get my head around it for quite a period, because I've just been so inculcated that we must have growth. But if we have 90% waste in most of our environments, if we reduce that even by 30 or 40%, we have loads of room for good things to happen. If we create repairing and the ability to repair things, we will create millions of jobs for engineers in cities and towns in Dublin and in Vienna, etc. So there's a huge new economic model that we can build around maintenance and reuse. The only people that will hurt is the elite, the Jeff Bezoses, the tiny elite that are actually gaining. Most of the middle class in the digital economies are in decline. So this growth is not actually helping most people in most society today. It is only helping a small elite. So a sustainable economy, more around a degrowth model and more around a maintenance and sustainability model, I think is a much better model for 95% of the population.
That's fantastic. I'm going to go to a question from Curtis. He states that IoT is data rich, but does not have to be wasteful. For example, you can cache and process most of the data being created at the endpoints and only push aggregate data, which could be up to 100 times smaller, to the server room. Can this design pattern be used in more aspects of digital transformation, i.e. store aggregates and not raw logs?
Absolutely. I think this is great sort of thinking. But even more foundational is, do we even need to store this? When I look at a lot of data environments and I go through them and I analyze them, everybody says that's useless. There's absolutely no possible use of this data. So a lot of data has actually no use. Data is not all potential value. So we can make decisions that says there's no use for this. Or even if we're saying, oh, maybe we use it. Well, 6 months later, 2 months, well, we've never used this one. Well, let's stop collecting it. So aggregating, etc., and coming up with more intelligent ways, great to see. But really looking at foundational issues. Do we need to collect? Do we need most analytics, website analytics? I've been in website analytics meetings since 1998. 99% of them were a waste of time. Nothing productive ever came out of, oh, we've got this many visitors and they've stayed 3 minutes on the page. It was like a stupid, redundant, vain process that was going on. So data isn't all good to collect. A lot of stuff we just shouldn't collect. Why should we always be tracking people, in the process, as if the whole point is to collect stuff? Standing back and saying maybe there's a lot of stuff that we don't actually need to collect in the first place.
And this also bridges beautifully to the next question about the user experience of being tracked and the confidence we have in companies. Holger has a question about regarding data. I think that the cat's out of the bag, he says. Huge amounts of data are easy to gather and give a sense of security / confidence that companies will not give this up voluntarily.
Yeah.
Any comments on that?
Well, Wolfgang, yeah.
I think the only way to deal with this is maybe to have taxes like we have now for the pollution made by cars or so. So I think it needs some laws, and we must make it expensive to store data. So then that's a logical consequence. I think we are now with this digital waste thing. We are there where we've been with the pollution by cars 30 years ago. Then there came some laws and taxes and that's what we need for the digital world as well. Waste shouldn't pay off. That's easy.
Absolutely. And think of the positioning as well. If we say we don't track you, we don't. We're one of the holistic, sustainable brands. We don't track you. We don't. We don't collect information on you. That can be a positioning in the future. Just like we use clean water. We are non-polluting. We don't track. Or we track in an absolute minimum way. There's lots of people. I think we're going to have a privacy tsunami, in the next 10 or 15 years as more and more people become conscious of, their integrity. Data privacy is the next human right. It will be part of the United Nations human rights. People will recognize it more as a core human right. So I think organizations need to become aware of the rising sense of our data being collected and invaded.
And I mean that wave is on the rise as well with GDPR, etc. More global leadership around this type of governance is going to. That I think. I mean, when we have Intersection Conference in 5 years, everybody, you heard it first here that human rights and privacy data will be one and the same conversation. Very last question before we wrap it up, again from Curtis. Delete 90% is a great goal, but how do you convince executives to do this?
Well, I think there are tools coming from enterprise architecture, from my discipline and home base. There are tools, but it's always a hard game to have arguments. If somebody goes to the CEO and says, "I have a quick and dirty solution," and it creates immediately. So it's about this immediately and this quick and dirty thinking that is prevalent. So it's a change in mindset, and I believe that it gets visible these days. So digital transformation is not happening that much. Not much is happening. For me, the reason is that the companies don't invest in the structure. They don't reduce complexity. They must get adaptive, modular, and those stuff. And I think we will see that because this rise of things like agile, these hypes will pass and they haven't led anywhere. So I think we are good, and this will be the next wave. I think so.
Yeah. And as Wolfgang said, if it's quick and dirty, well, dirty is dirty. And if we're moving towards a cleaner world, we need to be less dirty in our designs in the process and the future. So there are good arguments here that cleaner is more efficient.
On the medium and long term, and that's a problem.
Yes. The short term. I was saying last night, nobody ever asked me about the high hanging fruit. It's always the low hanging fruit. But I think as designers, the greater challenge is for the high hanging fruit.
I think that is a perfect ending anecdote, Gerry and Wolfgang. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives with us. The chat is absolutely exploding with feedback and questions and comments. So you've really struck a nerve and inspired a lot of people. Again, from Oslo, thank you so much for wrapping up this section. And I cannot wait to see you again, Gerry.
Yes,
our across, which is wonderful. And I wish you a fantastic rest of your Saturday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye for now, everyone.
Bye from Vienna.